fragments as musicologists. Jewish marriage documents were an obvious candidate for special illumination, and a bride who had a very beautifully illuminated ketubah, marriage document, could be particularly proud.
I, Sarah, agree to marry this man and to be his wife and companion in purity, holiness, and fear of God, to listen to his words, to honor him and to hold him dear, to be his helper and to keep his house as a virtuous Jewish woman is expected to do, and my desire will be toward him.
I, Hezekiah, bridegroom, will provide my bride with all her needs and wishes according to my ability. I will conduct myself towards her with truthfulness, with love and affection. I will not grieve her nor oppress her, and will let her have food, clothing, and marital relations as is proper for Jewish men.
Here we have the fragment of a child's exercise book. One of the areas in which Jews did use artistic devices, the menorah is here represented on the outside to make it perhaps more interesting for the child to read his book. Education was always important for Jews, and one gentleman away from home writes a note to his wife asking her to look after his child. He writes it in the following way. He says, "I'm dreadfully upset."
Remember to teach Eliakim how to read from different angles of view, so his schooling will not suffer. And make sure he says all blessings and prayers. Also, make sure he's dressed warmly, and that he is good with companions, and that he doesn't hurt himself.
Another area in which illumination was used is, of course, the Passover Haggadah. And here we have a Passover Haggadah in which 2 or 3 of the letters are similarly illuminated. Bible fragments show us how Hebrew was pointed and partly how Hebrew was pronounced in the various communities at that time. But not only that, notes made about the text of the Hebrew Bible were sometimes regarded as a little bit boring, and so the scholar writing them made them into a design, what's called micrography. He used the tiny little letters and turned them into a design to make it more interesting. Eretz Israel, the Holy Land, figures very prominently in some of the fragments. There is one particularly poignant one which deals with a Jew trying desperately to escape from the crusading armies in about 1099. He writes from a small village called Chatzor, near Ashkelon, on the southwest coast of Eretz Israel. He writes to his friend in Egypt and asks for a special permit. He says, "I would like to move out of this village because of the terrible news which arrives." Obviously, he is referring to the crusading armies. "I would like to move from Chatzor to Ashkelon because Ashkelon is much better fortified. I'd be safer there. Please speak to the Muslim leader and ask him to issue a permit for me so that I should have full authority to move around and no one would do me any harm." In the community here, he writes, he was a dayan in the community, a judge, a Jewish judge. "Things are not so marvelous. I get nothing from the community except with a good deal of trouble." We don't know whether that rabbi survived, and a much happier fragment deals with tourism, if you like, in Eretz Israel, in the Holy Land, in about the 14th century. In this fragment, rather a colorful one in fact, the names of various cities in Eretz Israel are highlighted in colors for the tourist. Now, why did people go to Eretz Israel in the 14th century? They went to visit the tombs of the patriarchs, the tombs of famous scholars and rabbis. And so this fragment gives them details of where to go to see the tomb of particular people. Before the period of the Geniza, in the 8th and 9th centuries, the community of Jews in the Holy Land was a very important one, a very active one. From the Geniza, we now can rebuild the life of the community in Eretz Israel. We now know of hundreds, not hundreds, thousands of poems written by Palestinian Jewish poets in that period. One is a poem written by a poet living in the Holy Land called the Yanai, probably in about the 7th century.
And all shall wreath crowns for you, who are feared by faithful angels, mighty heroes, creatures of ice mingled with fire, and your dread is upon them. Yet you desire glory only from those made of dust.
Like all poets, Yanai wanted to innovate as much as possible. Innovate not only in ideas, but also innovate in language. And this is one of the major elements of piyut, or Hebrew liturgical poetry used in the synagogue. The idea of innovation. There are a number of research specialists working on the fragments in the Teleshechte Genize Research Unit. Rabbi Dr. Ephraim Yehuda Wiesenberg has worked on the rabbinic fragments here in Cambridge.
The great importance of the Genize lies in the fact that Jewish books share the fate of Jewish people. Life is not always fun to anyone. Life has got its problems. And Jews, qua human beings, have got the same problems as other human beings. In addition to that, they have got specific problems as Jews.
Dr. Paul Fenton, Hebrew and Arabic expert.
Another illustration of the inferior status of the Jews was the imposition made by the Islamic government on the Jews to donate an annual poll tax of 2 dinars. This is quite a sizable sum in terms of earnings at the time.
My present state is marked by illness, infirmity, wanton and excessive fear, since I am sought by the controller of revenue, who is hard upon me, and writes up warrants for my arrest, sending runners to track me down. I'm afraid they will find out my hiding place. If I fall into their hands, I shall die under their chastisement, or will have to go to prison and die there. Now I take my refuge with God and with you.
Very often, because of the sizable sum that Jews had to pay for the poll tax, this caused them great grief and hardship, and many of them had to go into hiding in order to escape discovery by the government agents.
Dr. Penelope Johnston is an expert on the history of medicine. She did field work among the Bedouin tribesmen in Jordan and Israel, and has come here to Cambridge to work specifically on all the medical fragments in the collection.
But apart from the fact that the Genize gives a large number of pieces taken out of what you might call scientific textbooks of the time, you get a lot which are little scraps of paper which one would imagine were, for instance, just notes that some pharmacist had made for his own use, or perhaps the doctor had handed to a patient. And these have revealed a very large number of different types of materia medica that were used at the time. Some of them as spices for cooking, some of them in a rather less elaborate type of medicine as would be used by the Arabic-speaking world today. This is a fairly typical box